The night started just like any other family gathering. The long wooden table was glowing under soft lights, plates steaming with food that smelled like comfort itself, and laughter filling every corner of the room. I slipped into my seat beside David, trying to let the warmth of the evening wash over me. For a while, it felt safe, steady, almost like life was exactly how I wanted it to be. David leaned back in his chair, looking far too at ease, tossing out jokes that made everyone chuckle. He broke bread, raised his glass, and carried himself like a man with nothing to hide. I smiled when I had to, but my eyes wandered. I've always been the one who notices the little things, the nervous hand, the quick glance, the words people don't say out loud. It's a habit I can't unlearn. And then, just as the room buzzed with chatter and clinking glasses, it happened. His niece, sweet and innocent, spoke up with a giggle that sliced through the air sharper than any knife. I swear the sound of her tiny voice turned the whole room into silence, and in that instant, my world tilted in a way I didn't see coming. "Uncle David, I think your new girlfriend is prettier than Aunt Karen," she said, giggling as if it were the funniest joke in the world. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth, suspended in the air. The sound of clinking silverware died instantly, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. My smile stayed frozen, but my stomach lurched like the floor had just given way beneath me. I forced my voice to sound calm, light even, though I could feel the heat rising to my face. "Sweetheart, what do you mean by new girlfriend?" I asked, tilting my head just enough to hide the storm gathering in my eyes. She looked at me so innocently, shrugging as she chewed her food, completely unaware of the bomb she had just dropped in the middle of the table. "The lady you took me to the park with last week," she said between bites. "You told me not to tell Aunt Karen." And just like that, I felt every gaze shift to me, then to David. My hands tightened around the fork, and when I finally looked up at him, his face was pale, his charm stripped away. That was the moment I knew I wasn't imagining things anymore. David's eyes darted around the table, looking for a lifeline, but no one spoke. His parents stared down at their plates, his sister's fork rested midair, and the silence grew heavier with every second. I kept my smile, though it felt stitched onto my face, fragile and forced. Inside, my chest burned. I wanted to scream, but instead, I let the silence do the work. It was louder than any words I could have thrown at him. He cleared his throat, tried to laugh, but his voice cracked. "Kids say the silliest things," he muttered, reaching for his glass as if a sip of water could wash away the truth. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him, really looked, and in that moment, he knew I wasn't buying it. His niece had spoken with the kind of honesty only children dare to voice. And once a child tells the truth, it's almost impossible to stuff it back into the dark. My fork touched the plate again, but my appetite was gone. I stayed quiet, letting him squirm in the silence he'd earned. Everyone else tried to shift the conversation back to normal, but it was too late. The damage had been done, and I carried that little girl's words like a stone in my chest. And as the dinner dragged on, I was already bracing myself for what the ride home would bring. The car ride felt like a prison sentence. The hum of the tires on the road was the only sound filling the silence, and even that felt suffocating. I stared out the window, my reflection in the glass looking like a stranger. Eyes hard, lips pressed tight, jaw clenched to keep from exploding. Beside me, David gripped the steering wheel, tapping his fingers nervously, like he was trying to drum his way out of the mess he'd created. He forced out a laugh, thin and shaky. "Kids. They make up the wildest stories, don't they?" His voice hung in the air, desperate for me to catch it, to play along, to let him off the hook. But I didn't move. My eyes stayed fixed on the blur of passing streetlights, and I let the weight of silence crush him. He hated silence. It was a mirror he couldn't escape. Finally, I turned my head, my voice sharper than the cold night air. She didn't make that up, David. What's her name? I asked. My words cut clean, no emotion wasted. For a second I saw him flinch, like he'd been caught in a lie he hadn't rehearsed well enough. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't going to let this go. Not tonight. Not ever. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Karen, stop! You're twisting everything! He snapped, his voice rising, but it only made him sound more guilty. I turned toward him fully now, my face calm, my tone colder than I'd ever heard myself speak. No, you twisted our marriage. The words landed heavy in the small space between us, and for once, he didn't have a quick comeback ready. He opened his mouth, then shut it, struggling to find footing. I could almost see the panic swirling behind his eyes, the fear that the truth had finally caught up with him. He'd spent years polishing his mask, but tonight it had cracked, and I wasn't about to let him patch it back together with weak excuses. My silence after those words was sharper than any scream I could have thrown at him. I folded my hands in my lap, steadying my breath, memorizing every flicker of his face, every stammer he failed to hide. I wasn't going to fight him here, not trapped in this car, not when he still thought he could outtalk me. No, I would let him stew in his own fear, let him wonder how much I already knew. That, I realized, was my power now. The rest of the ride stretched out like an eternity. Streetlights flickered across the windshield, painting his face in flashes. Guilt, fear, desperation. I leaned back against the seat, my body still, but my mind racing. Every excuse he'd thrown at me tonight only confirmed what I already felt in my bones. The truth had slipped through his cracks, and I was the one holding the pieces now. I didn't ask another question. I didn't need to. His silence told me everything, and his fidgeting only wrote the confession louder. He kept glancing at me as if hoping to find softness in my eyes, but I made sure there was nothing for him to cling to. Let him sweat. Let him sit in the very silence he had forced on me for too long. When the house finally came into view, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to break. I was going to remember every word, every slip, every look of panic. And later, when the time was right, I'd use it all. The game had shifted tonight, and I wasn't the one losing anymore. The next morning, the house felt heavier than usual, like every wall carried the weight of what had been said. David moved around with forced cheer, whistling as he poured his coffee, but I saw right through it. I played along, kept my face steady, but inside, a plan was already forming. If he thought I was going to let this slide, he didn't know me at all. When he left for work, I sat at the kitchen table, my fingers tracing the rim of my mug as I thought about where to start. The phone records were easy. He wasn't careful, not nearly careful enough. Numbers I didn't recognize glared back at me, some calls short, others stretching into the late-night hours when I was asleep. Each one felt like a cut, but I refused to bleed in front of him. Then came the credit card statements. A hotel bill here, a restaurant charge there, all wrapped neatly around his supposed work dinners. The evidence was there, whispering the truth in black and white. I felt my chest ache, but right behind the pain was something sharper: resolve. If he thought I'd crumble, he was about to see just how steady I could stand. Later that week, I found myself standing outside my niece's school, waiting as children spilled out with their backpacks bouncing. When she spotted me, her face lit up, innocent and carefree, completely unaware of the storm brewing in my life. I knelt down, greeting her with a smile that masked the ache in my chest. Sometimes the hardest truths come from the softest voices. "Sweetheart," I said gently, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Remember that lady you saw with Uncle David? Can you tell me more about her?" She blinked, thought for a moment, and then answered with the kind of honesty only a child can give. "She had red hair. Uncle David bought her ice cream. He told me not to tell you." Her words fell like tiny hammers, shattering what little doubt I still clung to. I hugged her tightly, swallowing back the lump in my throat. "Thank you, love," I whispered, my voice steady even though my heart was breaking wide open. As she skipped away, I stayed frozen on the sidewalk, replaying every detail. Red hair, ice cream, secrets whispered into small ears. My husband had crossed a line I couldn't ignore, and now I had proof to follow him right to the edge of it. That night, after David drifted off to sleep beside me, I slipped out of bed and sat in the dim glow of the living room lamp. Papers spread across the coffee table, statements, printouts, call logs, each one a piece of the puzzle he thought I'd never put together. My hands trembled, but not from weakness. No, this was focus, the kind that comes when pain sharpens into clarity. I read the numbers again, matching them with dates, cross-checking with the charges that betrayed his trail. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how sloppy he had been, almost arrogant in his belief that I'd never notice. Every detail, every careless mistake, felt like a breadcrumb leading me closer to the truth. And I followed, step by step, because I wasn't going to let him bury me under his lies. As dawn crept in through the curtains, my decision was sealed. I wasn't just a wife left in the dark. I was the one holding the matches now, and when the moment came, I'd strike them in a way he'd never forget. For now, I gathered the pieces, waiting for the right time to lay them all at his feet. The confrontation was no longer a question. It was a promise. The evening felt heavy before it even began. I waited until the house was quiet, until David had settled into the couch with his phone in hand, pretending to scroll aimlessly. My heart was steady, my mind sharp. I walked in slowly, carrying the folder I'd pieced together over nights of silence and hidden tears. He looked up, his smile faltering when he saw the papers clutched in my hands. I placed them on the coffee table with deliberate calm, the sound of the stack hitting the wood echoing louder than any shout. "So," I said, my voice measured. "Red hair, ice cream, hotel bills. Do you still want to call it a child's story?" His face drained of color, his fingers twitching as though he might reach for the evidence, then thinking better of it. "Karen, please," he stammered, his eyes darting everywhere but mine. "I didn't mean for this to happen. She means nothing." His voice cracked, a pitiful plea, but I held his gaze without blinking. Inside me, a storm was raging, but on the surface, I was ice. I wasn't here for apologies. I was here for the truth he thought he could hide forever. I stood there, arms crossed, letting his words hang uselessly between us. "Nothing," I repeated, my tone sharp enough to cut through the room. "You brought her into our lives. You used a child's silence as your shield. And you dare stand there and tell me she means nothing?" My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The quiet conviction was enough to make him flinch. He leaned forward, desperation spilling from his every move. "We can fix this, Karen. We can get past it. Don't throw everything away." His words tumbled out fast, like he was trying to outrun the truth I had already cornered him with. But the more he spoke, the clearer it became. He wasn't pleading for me. He was pleading for himself. I shook my head slowly, almost pitying the man who once promised me forever. "I won't let Josh grow up thinking this is how a man treats his family," I said firmly. The way his shoulders slumped told me he knew. This wasn't just about me anymore. I was already thinking beyond this moment, beyond this house, to a future where his betrayal would no longer define the walls I lived in. His voice broke as he reached for me, hands trembling like he could somehow hold on to what was already gone. "Don't do this. Please, we can fix it." The words sounded rehearsed, like lines from a play he'd told himself for weeks, maybe months, but they carried no weight anymore. I stepped back, out of reach, the space between us wider than any room could measure. "You broke it when you thought you could hide behind a child's silence," I said, my voice steady as steel. His eyes filled with panic, his mouth opening and closing without forming words. For the first time, I saw him stripped bare, not the charming husband, not the family man, just a coward afraid of losing what he took for granted. I gathered the folder from the table, holding it close like a shield. Though I didn't need protection anymore, I had power. I turned toward the stairs without another glance, leaving him there in the living room, drowning in the weight of his own choices. Upstairs, I already knew the next step I would take. This wasn't an ending. It was the opening move in a plan he never saw coming. The following weeks were a blur of meetings, signatures, and strategy. My lawyer's office became a place of quiet strength, the kind of room where truth was finally given shape on paper. Every statement, every hotel charge, every phone record was laid out with precision. "With the testimony and financial proof," my lawyer said, tapping the documents, "you'll be well protected." I nodded, not with relief, but with resolve. I wasn't just ending a marriage. I was building a fortress for myself and for Josh. David had gambled with our family, and I refused to let him walk away unscathed. Custody, the house, financial security. It wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was justice, and it was mine to claim. Watching David sit across from me in those sterile rooms, his confidence slipping day by day, was its own kind of victory. At night, I would sit on the edge of my bed, folder in hand, and remind myself why I was doing this. Not because I wanted to hurt him, though part of me enjoyed watching his facade crumble, but because I deserved a life where lies weren't served at the dinner table, and so did Josh. This was about ending a cycle before it could ever touch him. Word spread quickly through the family, whispers over phone calls, hushed conversations at gatherings I no longer attended. Everyone knew what he had done. And to my surprise, most of them stood with me. Even his parents, who had always defended him, looked at me with quiet regret when we crossed paths. Disappointment hung heavy on their faces, but it wasn't aimed at me anymore. It was all for him. David tried, of course. He showed up with flowers once, voice cracking as he begged for another chance. But the man who once knew exactly how to make me laugh couldn't even look me in the eye without flinching. I let him stand there in the doorway, pitiful and small, before I closed it on him. He had chosen his path, and I had already chosen mine. Each win in court, each signed paper, chipped away at the power he once held over me. Watching him leave the courtroom, shoulders slumped, was like watching a king stripped of his crown. For years he thought he was untouchable. But now, every step I took forward was proof that his empire of lies had finally crumbled. When the final decree was signed, I walked out of the courthouse with my head high, the papers tucked neatly in my bag like a trophy of survival. The house was mine, custody secured, and David left with nothing but his shame. For once, I didn't feel like the one left behind. I felt like the one who had chosen the exit on my own terms. At home, I stood in the doorway of Josh's room, watching him sleep peacefully. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, untouched by the chaos his father had unleashed. I whispered a silent promise to him. He would grow up knowing loyalty, not betrayal. Strength, not silence. He would never have to question his worth because of someone else's weakness. David's shadow no longer darkened our walls, but I carried the memory of his betrayal like a scar. A reminder, not a wound. He had underestimated me, thought he could hide behind lies and a child's trust. But in the end, that child's words became the weapon I needed most. And now, I was ready to rebuild, piece by piece, without him. Months later, my dining table looked nothing like the one where my world had cracked open. It was smaller, cozier, surrounded by people who brought nothing but warmth into the room. Laughter spilled freely, glasses clinked, and the air carried no tension. only the rich aroma of food and the comfort of belonging. For the first time in years, I felt what peace actually tasted like. As I moved between the kitchen and the table, setting down dishes, I caught glimpses of smiles that weren't forced, conversations that weren't hiding landmines. This was my home now, steady, safe, and mine to shape. I wasn't the woman holding her breath anymore, waiting for the next crack in the facade. I was breathing fully, freely, owning every inch of this new chapter. A close friend leaned toward me, her voice warm with affection. "You look happier now than I've ever seen you." I met her eyes, my lips curving into a smile that came from someplace real. Raising my glass, I felt the weight of the past fall away. "Because," I said softly, "I finally stopped dining with lies." Across town, I knew David was a shell of the man he once pretended to be. His so-called new girlfriend had vanished the moment money got tight, leaving him alone with nothing but whispers of his mistakes. Even his niece, the same little girl who had spoken the truth that night, now avoided him, her once innocent trust replaced with quiet shame. The weight of his choices had finally caught up, and this time, there was no one left to shield him. I didn't need to see him to know. The family that once gathered around him no longer looked his way. They had watched his mask fall, piece by piece, and even his own parents carried disappointment in their eyes when his name came up. It was the kind of punishment he never expected, one that lingered long after I'd walked away. Meanwhile, I sat at my table, surrounded by love, not secrets. My laughter blended with those I cherished, not forced, not borrowed, but real. I realized then that freedom wasn't just leaving him, it was reclaiming myself. Every choice I made after that night at the dinner table was a step into the life I deserved, and I wasn't about to give any of it back. As the night wound down, I found myself holding my glass a little longer, the soft glow of the candles reflecting in the rim. I clinked it gently against the glasses of my friends and family, the sound ringing like a quiet anthem of survival. In that simple moment, I felt the fullness of my own strength, how far I had come from the woman frozen at a dinner table, fork suspended in midair. I leaned back in my chair, watching the faces around me, faces that carried no deceit, only love. My chest filled with a kind of ease I hadn't known in years. I whispered to myself, barely audible, but certain enough to carve itself into my bones. He thought a child's words would stay hidden, but they set me free. The words felt like a seal on everything I had fought for. And with that, I allowed myself to exhale, truly exhale, as though the air in my lungs finally belonged to me again. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, with dignity, with freedom, and with the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I had turned betrayal into my liberation. The past was behind me, and the table I sat at now was mine to fill with truth.